Incoming, incoming.
Come on, in the ditch.
From the building you can see just over there is probably the closest Taliban firing point to this checkpoint. It's only about 200 metres away.
The Northern Alliance troops on this front line say they are now ready to launch an all-out attack on their Taliban enemy.
We'd barely arrived when the barrage began. This small factory took the first hit, but the Russians weren't done.
Get down.
This is a sauropod. That's one of the long-necked, long-tailed dinosaurs, the barrel body and the tiny head.
Here, the spirit is raucous and full of life, and it's just wonderful.
We enjoyed the images yesterday. We were at Windsor, driven around by the Duke of Edinburgh, which is a courageous thing to do.
We've just heard an explosion in the distance. This is now the third time we've had to come down here for cover into the bunker.
I used to be the only Western journalist here. What a treat to be working with a camera woman.
Wow, Julie, Corinne, let's get away with this from the scripts. I hate reading from scripts. We've done the introductions. Julie, fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
My pleasure. Nice to be here.
Looking forward to hearing all about your career, and I'm sure Corinne is going to lead us down an amazing pathway tonight. So I'm going to hand over to you guys. I'll monitor the chat for you, and if there's anything that steps in, I'll let you guys know. Over to you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Andy. Wow, like I can't even fathom how many places that you've been to and everything that you've seen and experienced. The first question I had was just how did you get into it? How did you fall into that career path?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because the way I got into it is not how I think people could be able to get into it nowadays. A lot has changed in 35 years. So originally I was going to go to Glasgow Art School. I got into Glasgow Art School, but I thought I don't think that's going to be a career for me. So I ended up looking at film school. And so I went to Manchester and I did a 3-year, it was sort of a production course, which, covered a lot of different areas, like most courses do. There was a bit of camera, a bit of editing, a bit of producing, a bit of all sorts of things, animation. So I did that for 3 years, but during my summer holidays, I contacted the BBC and in those days you could just ring up the post-production office. It seems beyond, I can't imagine it now doing that, but that's what I did. I just rang up the post-production office and said, can I come and sit in the back of an edit suite? And it was a film edit suite back then. That's a long time ago. And so I would go and just sit and watch, and they'd make coffee. I'd make coffees for them and just watch what they were doing. But it got me known to them and so on. And then this is where one of those little lucky thing comes in. I was working in a off license as my student job. And one of the ladies who worked in the post-production office used to come and buy her sherry from me. So she came in about a month before I graduated. She came in and said, oh, we're looking for some, assistant film editors. Are you interested? And so I was like, yep, great. Went in and had a chat with the manager. And then the day after I graduated, I was in my first day in the BBC on a sort of month tryout. and that was it. I was with the editing department in Manchester for a while. Then I moved down to London, again with editing. But then in the early 90s, they wanted a multi-skill, and that's when I picked up a camera. That's when back then they had Wood Norton. The BBC had this training location called Wood Norton, and I went there for 2 weeks and did camera training alongside the cameramen who were learning to edit. So there was a big push to try and do this multi-skilling, kind of drive, which was really good. And yeah, I mean, I was just, really keen to sort of get involved in that, because I'd done 5 years sort of sitting in an edit suite, long hours in a dark room. It wasn't my thing. And so, as much as I love editing, I wanted it to have, a little bit more adventure. So that's why I ended up putting my hand up for that. And then I got based in New York for 3 years, Moscow for 3 years. When I was in Moscow, that's when 9/11 happened. So I ended up down in Afghanistan covering that, which you saw some of that footage in the showreel. And then likewise, 2003, I was embedded in Iraq for 5 weeks, basically camping in the desert, which was pretty full on, as you can imagine. And then came back and joined Newsnight for 7 years. And the last few years, really, I've been mostly doing sort of news gathering bits and pieces, but also a lot of training and recruitment, because I'm being in a fairly senior role now. I help out on that side of things as well. So I've done quite a bit of training and recruitment, and so that is something that I'm sort of obviously able to sort of talk about now. It's almost 10 years now I've been doing it. I was thinking earlier how long that, it's almost 10 years that I've been doing a lot of the recruitment.
Wow. So when you first started, how was the process of, I'm guessing there weren't many female camera women at that time. How was that process, and how's that different to it now?
Yeah, I mean, back then it was obviously the equipment was much bigger. I mean, I had a very big broadcast camera on my shoulder. They were the sort of Sony, if anybody knows anything about cameras, it was a Sony SP, then a Sony SX, then a PMW 500. So these were pretty big cameras and a lot of equipment. And it wasn't, it's not that it was it's not that it was putting people off. It was just, putting women off joining it. It's just that it was, I just don't think it was, I think a lot of women looked at it and just thought, well, obviously, I'm going to struggle at that, maybe, and I think it was just the sort of, the look of it, the sort of, a lot of people just discount it. Nowadays, of course, all the equipment's much smaller. I mean, I've actually got my camera here. Bit of show and tell here. So this is my camera. It's a DSLR style camera, but I shoot video on it. I've got two actually. I've got a Sony Sony Z280 as well, but this is an A7S Mark III. And so these can be done up to record video. Slightly different sort of way of operating than it is with a bigger shoulder mount camera or something more, sort of in your palm, sort of camcorder. But the point is that these cameras, they can be, they're being used in lots of different parts of the industry now. So I just think it opens it up more to a lot more, sections of the community, including, women, men. It is a much more, and also they're not as expensive. They're sort of prosumer kind of area, so the price is a lot less for this sort of rig, so people can actually go out and buy their own and start to work as a freelance. But then it's not just about having all the gear, it's also having the all the gear, no idea. We know that saying. But yeah, so that's when the element of training comes into it, which is very important, obviously, as well.
And what drew you to the side of broadcasting that you went down? Why did you not sort of go more into the TV and film and sort of dramatize?
Funny you should say that, because actually on my drama course, on my film and TV production course, I did think I was going to go into the film industry. That's what I actually was sort of aiming at. I thought, I sort of had it in my head that I might become a film producer. So that was sort of what I was sort of angling towards. But then I started to quickly realized that maybe wouldn't be as creative enough for me. You know, I did find on the course, and this is what's great about these sort of courses, is you're trying lots of different bits and pieces. And actually, I was quite good, and quite, even say so myself, I was quite good on the camera side and on the editing. I really enjoyed them. So you know, obviously that helps. And then I started to think, well, you know, could this be a possibility, you know, getting into the sort of more technical side of the industry? So that's, you know, kind of what then led me to contacting the BBC and asking to go and sit in an edit suite, you know, because I was quite enjoying, you know, the sort of the editing, because I had to produce a final year film, which was on film, and I had to edit it, you know, on an old Steenbeck. I don't know if anybody remembers those, but it was all just you know, the technology has changed so much as well. That's the other thing. But yeah, so I think so. I was originally on that course. But then, you know, opportunities just come up, don't they? And you grab them at, you know, I mean, I was 22. You just grab the, you know, the opportunities, you know. If that lady hadn't come into the off license and, you know, to buy her sherry that night and say to me, you know, we've got an assistant film role coming up, I might never have got into the BBC. It's just purely, quite often it's purely luck. And then, you know, getting into the news area. Well, again, I was on a contract in Manchester, so that was coming to an end, and I had to look wider, you know, at other jobs within the BBC, and there was jobs coming up at the news department in London. So, you know, I applied, and I got one of the jobs. So there was an element of I didn't really have any clear direction, but I knew that, you know, I was attracted to it because of the travel, and it was going to be interesting. So that's probably why I just kept going at that rather than deviating off again.
So with obviously your career spanning 35 years in the broadcasting, how did you find that, and what were sort of the biggest lessons that you've learned through the industry of broadcasting, sort of tricks of the trade, or the moments that really stuck out to you whilst you were doing that side of the broadcasting?
Well, I mean, you know, when you early on with the editing, you know, I was doing, I wasn't doing news editing. I was doing editing on a series called Reportage and Rough Guide, which were very music-based kind of programs. They were sort of current affairs-y kind of packages, but they were done in a sort of, you know, sort of more trendy, sort of stylized way. And so that was one type of editing. But then obviously when I come on to doing news editing, then it's all about speed, you know, and getting stuff done, you know, edited quickly. And I you know, I had spent, you know, many years doing the editing, so I had built up my speed. So when it came to actually doing the multi-skilling, learning the camera side, the actual editing bit, which is where the deadline is. So when you're out filming, especially if it's an on the day, as we call them in news, so you're filming a news story on the day, and then it's going out that night. You know, you can spend maybe, you know, 5-6 hours filming a package, and then you've got to edit it, and quite often that editing time is the bit that gets squeezed. You know, if a presser or an event overruns, it's that editing time that gets squeezed. So being fast on the editing and being confident on the editing side was just so helpful, and what really, you know, I can't recommend people enough to you know, not dismiss the editing side, because it is really, really crucial, especially in our job, in my job with, you know, with this doing as what we call a shoot edit. It's called a shoot edit or a camera journalist role within BBC News. And I think that was very, very important, and I learned quickly, you know, and also you learn little shortcuts of things that you need to do, and it does take time. I mean, the thing is, nowadays there's quite a sort of I sometimes feel that there's not enough time and effort is put into the training or the apprenticeship, not the official apprenticeship, but just the time that people spend in a role learning their craft, because it is quite it does take quite a long time to really get good at it. I mean, really good at it. You might think you're good at it, but actually, when you compare it to other people, and so I just think there is an element of, we need to. It's not. There's so many different skills that are needed for the shoot edit role, that you really do need time to build them up and get really good at all of them, because it's, there's so many different things. I mean, you're also, part diplomat, because you're on the road dealing with the public, or, you might have some, somebody quite angry coming at you. You've got to try and calm situation. You've got all of that to deal with. You've got the logistics, you've got to deal with carnets. There's an awful lot of skills required, not just knowing how to shoot using the camera, and how to edit. There's what we call roadcraft skills that you need to learn, and that, like I say, takes time.
Yeah, it sounds like being very resilient and having that sort of the buffer between the professionalism of the job and also just being human and being able to people that you're speaking with to get those real stories. When you were, what was the team like? Was it literally just yourself, or did you have other people?
No, so normally a team is a correspondent and a producer, and often then also in places like Ukraine, where I was last year, you have a fixer and you have a security, a high risk advisor, who is often, is like they're often ex-army, and they come and they basically, deal with the logistics and the safety side of things. So in Ukraine, there was 5 of us in the team. And that's normal for a war zone, and that was, quite often, unless you're embedded. Now, I've done 12 military embeds, which is quite a lot. Yeah. Most of them to Iraq and Afghanistan, most of them during, the period between 2003 and 2011. I think 11 was my last one. And when you do those, often, obviously, the military, they don't want a big team, so it's just you and the correspondent. It's kept small. You're in with the military anyway for 2, maybe 3 weeks, so that's it's not necessary, particularly to have. You don't need the fixer, the security guard, and actually the producer as well ends up not being part of the team, because we go there and we just and we're filming what's really happening. It's not not something that we're having to sort of find out information about. It's there, it's happening. We're there to sort of film what's going on. So that's usually the team. And when I was embedded in 2003 in Iraq, we were a much bigger group. We were actually, it was BBC, ITV, Sky, CNN. There was a whole load of us in this massive it was called the Ford Pick. We were initially in Kuwait, and then we came across the border, and we were in this sort of special group of journalists that were just back from the front line, but we were able to travel up to the front line quite a bit, and actually our role became quite important, because there were people that were deep embedded with, say, the Marines or other units around the place, but they were having problems with the satellite technology at the time. They were trying to feed, we were all feeding over satellites, and a lot of the satellites got blocked. So yeah, that, for military reasons, obviously. So that caused a slight problem. So we ended up actually doing a lot more than we expected. And actually doing more packaging and traveling around, and we had to get an armored vehicle sent into us, because initially we didn't think we'd need one, but then suddenly it was like, yeah, well, actually we want, we need you to be traveling around, because we've got to get packages and reports done for the evening news.
We touched on earlier about what you need to be good at, but what would you recommend for young filmmakers, people who just want to get into the industry, don't really know where to start? What would you say would be your sort of top 3 things for the human side as well as the technical side of the industry?
I've actually prepared. So I did a webinar earlier this year, and I sort of have, and it was actually, yeah, specifically designed at younger people coming or wanting to come into this industry. So I have actually laid out some sort of top tips, as it were, to sort of. So let me just I'll quickly go through and just highlight some of those. So the first thing is you need to be reasonably robust as a person. You need to know that it's not glamorous. You could be working long hours with little sleep, not much food, or skipping meals and everything. So there is an element of you need to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. Okay, and possibly for quite long periods. So there is an element of that. If you like sitting in front of the sofa every night with you're watching if that's your thing, then this ain't your thing. Then really the three basic sort of things is obviously an eye for images. If you're interested in photography, as I am, and as most of my camera crew colleagues are, you need to, that's a good starting point. Having a really good eye for images is massively important. And understanding photography, because now, as you can see, I'm operating what is it's gone much more that way. You do actually now really need to understand a bit more, about photography to be doing this role, because it's sort of going more that way with the equipment anyway. You need to be flexible. You need to be able to sort of react quickly and not get too flustered if suddenly, plans change. It's like, oh, you're going here. No, actually, that's not happening now. You're going there. Flexible, being adaptable is really, really important. And also having a strong understanding of digital sort of production, just getting across. I mean, that's where obviously doing a training course, some sort of media course, or just understanding what goes into the production, the workflow. For us, a lot of we use a lot of BBC internal sort of apps. So we edit on a laptop, we film on the cameras, we then edit, input and edit on a laptop. We're then feeding that into base from all over the world. We could be anywhere, but as long as we've got an internet connection, or as long as we've got, if we're in a very remote location, I would probably take what's called a BGAN with me, which is a little clamshell kind of device which sends your footage up to the satellite and then back down again. So having an understanding of the workflow and of just generally digital production and is really, really good. And then. I mean, also, just being a team player. This is, it's really the person. Look, you're not going to get on with everyone. Okay, nobody. There's always going to be sort of personality clashes in any job you do, but being able to work in a team and knowing and just being able to just keep you cool when things are possibly going all a bit sort of wrong around you, or whatever, that is really important. And I know a lot of people on this webinar will be from a background where that's also an important skill with the military, obviously. So a lot of what you have learned within them, it applies. In fact, we have camera crews that have come from a military background as well, and those skills do transfer quite a bit. So that's another one. Having some good storytelling skills. I mean, if you're able to, and this is going to be a really good way of building a show reel, is if you can, get yourself this setup here with a sort of the camera, it's in a cage. That's what this handle is. It's just in a cage, and that means I can attach my radio mic, and this is another mic here. This setup, you're looking at sort of maybe sort of 3,000 or 4,000. I mean, it's not cheap, but and you can get cheaper. Also, you can even do stuff on your phone initially. The key thing is being able to tell a story and understanding about storytelling. So if you haven't got a show reel, start to come up with some ideas. Go around your local community, find some stories that you might be able to turn into effectively what looks like a bit of a news package, but maybe be sort of be loose with it. You don't have to be too strict on that, but find stories and actually start to film and edit some stories together. And just, even if you are just shooting, I mean, these phones are great, I do so much on my phone as well. I use it all the time for work, as well, and I do a lot of photography on that. So that's a 13 with the wide angle camera and everything. So I would really recommend people do that as well, because that is just going to start building your understanding of storytelling, and that's quite an important, because going forward, the industry's changing. There aren't these delineated roles anymore. It is merging. So if you've got some journalistic training and storytelling skills, if you can do you're on top of the technical side, because not everybody understand, can get to grips on the technical side. But if you've got a good understanding of photography, and you can get your speed up on the editing, then you'd be in a good place with doing this role.
Amazing. I know obviously we're at past now, so we're about to get into the Q&A session.
Mm-hmm.
The last question I wanted to personally ask was, is there any standout moments that you think, wow, once in a lifetime experiencing that, would love to either go back again or never?
Yeah, I think Afghanistan was quite something, because I mean, that's not somewhere where you would go very often. So I was there in 2003 when the whole hunt for bin Laden was happening. I was in Kabul for quite a few months. That's an amazing country, just stunning geography and scenery, and the people were amazing. So that I'd love to go back to Afghanistan at some point. That would be really good. I also did a fantastic trip up to North Sweden with Sir Ranulph Fiennes. He was training. I've worked with him twice now. When he did his 7x7x7 marathon. I filmed about 3 of those. I was with him down in Punta Arenas in southern Chile, and then Cairo. We did one around. You saw in the show reel, in the introduction video, and he was run. That was one of the marathons he did between the pyramids. So I went to Sweden with him, and we did some training. We filmed 4 days in this area where he was training to do go across Antarctica in the winter, which hasn't been done before. Now, unfortunately, it ended up not happening due to frostbite and so on. But we had 4 days up there, and the temperature got down to -43, which I have never experienced. I had a bigger camera then. All of my cables just were solid. And we had to keep the car running so I could shove stuff in and defrost everything, including myself. I had my feet up on the heaters of the car and everything. But that was a fantastic opportunity to just sit in the evenings and just listen to Sir Ranulph Fiennes talking about his career and everything he's done, which is an amazing sort of career he's had. But yeah, I mean, there's lots and lots of things. Meeting President Obama. I mean, there's lots and lots of things that I could say. That is the good thing about this role, this job, that you get to meet so many different people, and you get to go to so many different places. That's what really attracted me. If you haven't got an inner adventurer in you, then this isn't for you. You need to want to just go out and keep exploring and keep seeing new places. That's what this job can do. Now it's getting harder. Budgets are getting cut tight. I don't want to sugarcoat it, because I've had a fantastic career with what I was doing, but that was in a certain period when we were traveling. We're not traveling quite so much anymore within our department because the budgets are tighter. And also, trying to reduce the amount of flying we do, because for sustainable reasons. So I think it is changing, definitely, and I think that it's but there's still opportunities there. There's still going to be lots of different areas that you can find that are going to be interesting.
Are there any regrets that you have from from your time working? Anything that you wish that, you know, you either appreciated it a bit more, or you were forewarned, or anything?
No, I always knew that I was, you know, very, very fortunate to be doing what I was doing. And wherever I was just often just thinking, oh my God, I can't believe I'm here. You know, there was lots of times that happened. So no, not really. I've had a really good career, and I must admit, I haven't really got any regrets. It's exactly what I wanted out of a career, to just be able to do what I've done. So, you know, it's been great.
Amazing to be able to say that about a career, because most people, I'm sure, would have said, oh, you know, there are a few things that I would like to have changed or done differently, or, you know, been paid more. But I suppose,
oh yeah, well, when you yeah, I mean, when it comes to that, well, everybody's different when it comes to that. I mean, and hey, that is a big issue obviously within this industry, because budgets are getting tightened. So it you know, believe me, it is an issue. And also, you know, training budgets are being cut. I mean, I've got a neighbor who's been working recently on the film Deadpool, and he, you know, and they've all, obviously with the writer's strike, they've not been, but listening to him talk about his industry, there are, you know, it's across all industries that budgets are tighter, longer working hours. You know, it's a hard industry to be in, but you know, there is, with sacrifice there are rewards. So it depends how you feel yourself, how much, you know, you want that to have this lifestyle, because believe me, it is a lifestyle, you know, it really is. And it is quite difficult. People often ask me, more recently I've had the question, you know, so how do you, you know, balance sort of work-life balance? It is really, really hard. Okay, I don't have children, so, you know, there's an element of that. You know, I don't that's not a regret. I don't think I ever probably would have. I wasn't in that way inclined, but I think, yeah, I think, you know, you have to really think about what you want, where you're headed, because you can go into this career and then it can become quite full on very quickly, and then it's you know, you've fought hard to get in it, and then you reach a point where you're thinking, right, now how can I actually sort of pivot here because I want to do this as well, I want to maybe, you know, so it's, you know, it's hard, it's difficult. So you know, you have to really just go into it with your eyes open.
And on that note, what's next for you? What are you
Well, I'm part-time now. I actually have gone part-time. I felt after 35 years, I felt that was a present to myself. So I do I do a lot of recruitment. I sit on interview boards quite a lot. I do quite a bit of training and mentoring. And I mean, I do still, you know, I do still film. I do still, you know, love to do that. But I find that I'm being asked more to do the training and the recruitment. There's quite a lot of that sort of side of it, because I deal with the Z280 camera, and so I've been doing quite a bit of that. And because obviously now I'm on reduced time, you know, part-time, it's sort of that the training and the recruitment, it actually very quickly fills my time and my days. So so that's what I've been doing more recently.
And with everyone who's coming into the industry at the minute, what are you seeing that you would like to see more of? Is there anything?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. I mean, a big topic for us at the moment is training of younger staff. That's a really, really key thing, because, you know, you can do training courses internally. We've done training courses, I run them. But then if those staff aren't then immediately going out and using those skills, they lose them. So, you know, I might train up an editor to do a bit of filming, to be, you know, on the camera side, so that they can go out and do a bit of filming. But if they're not then going out and doing that, and they're being asked to edit more, then there's a problem. You know, they lose those skills. Also, I don't think a training course is enough. You need, I think what I'd like to see more of is shadowing opportunities. And again, that's just having enough people to then backfill and you know, to provide, to allow for those opportunities. And I do know that other companies are doing bursaries and things, and I think I'd like to see more of that. Definitely, apprenticeships are good. The BBC do lots and lots of apprenticeships. For my own department, we don't have a specific apprenticeship for our own department that is just for, you know, focused on the camera and editing side of things. I think that's I'd like to see maybe something a bit more bespoke, because, you know, the apprenticeship program is really, really good that the BBC do, but it's quite a broad brush of intake. You know, the criteria for the people that they bring in are, you know, they could end up being studio directors or a floor manager, or, you know what I mean, they might they come in not really knowing what they want to do, because they're usually straight from school, so that's fair enough. You know, yeah, I didn't, you know, I wasn't 100% sure either, so that it takes a few years for them to sort of go through the process of just trying everything. But yeah, it's a tricky one. It's really hard. But to train, yeah, I'm quite focused on the train, and shadowing, I think, is a because in the, you know, years ago, I started off as a sound crew initially. I was a sound person with a cameraman, so there was always two of us. There was two of us in a team. I'd like to try and get back to that buddying up again. Now, whether, you know, it doesn't necessarily have to be somebody doing sound, it could just be, you know, somebody doing a second camera. On interviews, we're always needing second cameras on lots of things. So, you know, but, you know, again, it's budgets, it boils down to just having, you know, the funding to do that. It's quite tricky in this current sort of climate, where, you know, there is no magic money tree, as it were. So yeah.
Julie, it seems like a perfect job. It seems like an opportunity for me to dive in there. I mean, we've got a few questions in the chat, which I'll put to you shortly, but it's interesting what you said there about companies providing training for people who want to step into this and providing bursaries. So it seemed like a fitting point to mention for those from the armed forces community on this webinar. It's always worth them having a look at BFBS Academy. They're always running training courses, and often with bursaries. Indeed, myself and some of the other people that are on the webinar tonight are currently on a production manager's course with that same academy, and the course itself does have a bursary, so that may help. First question we've got for you is from Shireen, and I do apologise if I've pronounced your name wrong, but she's asking, what type of camera did Julie say that she had just now? I think that's been answered by someone else in the chat, but if you could just cover that again, Julie, it'd be great.
Yeah, it's so this is a Sony A7S Mark III, and the S stands for sensitivity, so it's really good in low light. So it took a while. We were waiting for this particular camera to come out. We were waiting, the release date, Sony release date, kept sort of moving, and we were waiting. Finally, it came out. So this is what a lot of us use. We also use a Z280. You'd need to look that up, but a Sony Z280 that's more of a camcorder type camera, which we often use on a monopod. But this also, you know, you've got the thing with this, they're very different cameras for different skills. The Z280 is a really good sort of run and gun news camera, you know, sort of for just, you know, events, presses, what have you, because everything, all the audio and the lens is fixed and all the audio is built in and everything, and so it's actually it's actually ideal for run and gun news, and the image quality is really, really good. This camera is a favorite for more featurey work, because you've got the option to change the lenses. You can use primes, you can, you know, lenses, you can, so you can get that. Also, it's a full frame camera, so you can get that lovely sort of shallow depth of field that people really love in that look that is quite popular for more featurey work. You know, it can be overdone, I have to say, but, you know, as long as you control the urge to sort of make everything really mushy behind, because my sometimes I do get a little bit, get on my hobby horse about this, because with news, a lot of news is about where an event that's happening someplace, and you kind of want to see what's going on behind, don't you? Because it's about news, it's about being in that location. If you sort of push everything back into sort of a defocused state behind, you could be anywhere. So I get a little bit up on my hobby horse about that occasionally, but this camera can do that. It can, is really, and it's a lovely camera. You've got a lot more, there's a lot more autofocus functions that you have to enable on this, because basically we're not octopuses. We don't have like 4 arms. So I have to, a lot of things I have to put into auto on this camera, whereas my Z280, I can work that fully manual. It's just so there are pluses and minuses with both cameras. So yeah, and you've got and again, you're attaching a radio mic on the top there like that. This is a dual receiver, and then I've got 2 transmitters in my kit bag. So but you're attaching stuff in it, and it soon gets pretty heavy, actually, and I haven't even put my little light on here. So before you know it, this is getting quite heavy. So we also use monopods for these cameras as well, because we're quite we're quite sort of on it with the manual handling side of things, because I've had a bad back, and I know colleagues have had bad backs and shoulders, and now with these cameras we're starting to get a lot of wrist complaints and things. So you need to, but you can use these in lots of different ways, and you've got the monopod and you've got different ways of holding it. So yeah, so does that answer your question? And the lens I'm using, so this is a 24 to 240 millimeter, but which is a standard sort of zoom. It kind of works perfectly for new stuff, really, because you've got quite a good range on that lens. But I also sometimes shoot with a 50 millimeter prime, or a 16 to 35, a bit more of a wide. In Ukraine, I had 2 of these cameras, one with this lens on it, the more zoom lens, and so that was hanging on one side, and then I had on the other side another camera with a 16 to 35, which actually is a nice camera for doing interviews and pieces to camera. And then you've got this one for the more sort of GVs and anything that's going bang in the distance and stuff like that. So that's why that so I actually was looking more like a photographer would, with 2 cameras, different lenses, flat jacket, helmet, the whole works. Before you know it, it's a heavy amount of kit that you're having to wear all day and lug around. So.
Do you know what? That question was actually answered by Nick in the chat as well, so I'm glad you were able to help on that one as well. On a similar theme, Mary asks,
"Thank you, Nick."
What are you using? He'd left.
I think I know
back,
the Nick.
So
I think I know who it is.
There we go. Brilliant. Sorry, Mary asks, what are you using to edit on these days? We talked about this a little bit last night as well. So yeah, if you could talk a bit about that.
Yeah, so we all have. Well, I'm doing this webinar on my my M2 MacBook. I've only just recently had an upgrade to this MacBook, but on it, and you when you're dealing with 4K footage, you do need kind of a pro sort of a pro style computer. So this has the full sort of memory and RAM that you need to be dealing with processors to deal with 4K footage. So if I'm doing a feature, I may shoot 4K, but we can't transmit in 4K. The news is transmitted in HD. We still have to transmit. So we'll bring in 4K footage into Final Cut Pro 10. That's the software we use. And we'll then put it onto a timeline, which basically down converts it from 4K to HD. But what's good about shooting it in 4K is you can crop and not lose much of resolution. So an interview, you can frame it wide, but then you can actually crop into a close-up of the person's face, and you're creating edit points with using one camera. So that's a really good technique that we often use when you might need, a clip from the beginning of the answer, and then another answer is added on, rather than having what would look like a jump cut. Effectively, if you just kept it the same size framing, you can actually push in, crop it so that it's just a sort of a mid close up on the head, on the face, and then that allows you to do sort of do a bit more on the editing. So yes, so it's Final Cut 10 that we use, and we were on Final Cut 7 like years ago, and I trained a lot of our crews up to swap across, and it's quite a different software, but I think everybody, you know, is really happy with it now. It's got a magnetic timeline, which we weren't used to before. It was, you know, I actually started off editing on Avid years ago. That was the first non-linear system I used, and then we moved on to this, and Avid is still used in certain places in the BBC. So, you know, Glasgow I know use it, and a few others. So there are a lot of different editing systems within the BBC that are being used in certain areas, but for us it's Final Cut, and then I know Quantel is used in Base with some of the editors as well, because, you know, that's again to do with the workflow, hooking up to the servers and everything that then, you know, put the stuff onto air, you know, that transmits everything on the server. So there's a lot of editing that has to sort of work with other bits of, you know, the workflow in the BBC. So that's why internally they've gone that way, but a lot of their editors can use Final Cut as well. But that's my current editing platform. Whether it will stay that way, I don't know. You know, other things come along.
It's good to hear you mention that, because there's a few of the people on our course are using Final Cut for their editing as well. So I'm sure they'd appreciate you talking about what you can and can't do, especially when it comes to 4K and HD. I've got two questions here that are of a similar vein, so I'll read them both at the same time. Christopher Jones, I think I know who this Christopher Jones is, and he's actually just sent me a WhatsApp message. He's really keen to hear about what you're doing, because he's really keen to get into this line of work. Chris asks, and then I'll go straight into the second question, what advice would you give to someone looking to get into this role? And the next one is, Hartley asks, what would you say is the best way to get into the BBC? What kind of people do you look for, and what should go on the CV? I'm sure you get asked that about the CVs a lot of time. Every masterclass. It's on all the Facebook groups, isn't it?
It's a really. I know. Listen, look, you know, I can't really go through with. I mean, a CV it's a tricky one. I mean, you know, obviously I see so many different types of CVs that, quite honestly, not too long is good. But also just very clear and concise sort of you know, your experiences, and also just a little, we often want to know you know, a bit about you as well. So often people put on CVs, it's all about what, you know, what they've, you know, the roles and what they've achieved, but actually just a little bit about your own interests and your own sort of you know, a bit more personality into them is quite good as well. That's but you know, CVs are an art into themselves, and I can't say I'm a particular expert in them, so I might have to just sort of skip that one slightly. But yeah, I mean, trying to get into the BBC, you know, it's really difficult for anyone. I know, I appreciate that. Our main route, one of our main routes, certainly in the past, has been recruiting. So we're national news, so that's, you know, the 1 o'clock, 6 o'clock news, 10 o'clock news, the news channel. We often recruit from the regions. So, you know, looking at regional BBC officers and seeing what opportunities come up there for you know, apprenticeships, or doing, you know, there are apprenticeship roles all over, and trying to do those, I think, would be a really good starting point, because, and getting in and showing an interest in sort of the local news stuff. If you can, find out who's in charge of particular departments within you know, in the areas you want to actually apply to, and just pester them, you know, just send them, you know, don't just send one email, send 30 is what I always tell people. and I can hear all these BBC bosses around the, you know, the country going, no, Julie, don't tell them that.
At this point, we realise it's quite.
But ultimately, you know, you do have to show. You know, you've got to really be keen, and you know, and you know, if somebody is being inundated, eventually they're going to say, "Look, this person's really keen," and they've got the. You know, they've got the sort of the perseverance to keep, you know, to keep at it. So you do need to show, you know, that really helps. But try and focus on exactly what it is you do. Find out who's doing that. Find out if there's somebody, you know, near you locally who you know, you can either have a chat to, get advice from. Maybe they'll agree to be your mentor, shadow them, all that sort of stuff. It's, you know, there's no one clear way, because we get people coming from a journalist background now as well. And I would also say that actually having a little bit of a journalist background is really going to hold you in good stead in the future, because, you know, roles are starting to, you know, mesh together a little bit more, and people, I mean, I've done my own packages for the BBC. I went to Antarctica on holiday, and I actually did a news piece at the feature, you know, but I reported it, I did a piece to camera, I did, you know, so we can all, you know, if you've got the ability to do that, and I'm not saying I do, you know, I don't do that all the time, but the thing is, I know I can if I had to, not like, you know, in a hurry, but I can do it. And having those skills and being able to do a range of things now is really, really useful. I hope that's helped. It's quite a difficult one, you know, when being asked that, you know, it's quite hard. But apprenticeships and getting into, you know, certain colleges. City do a really good, in London do a really good journalism and media courses. They're worth looking at, because we get quite a lot of people from City University.
Thank you. I mean, I've got a question myself regarding that, but I'll come to that later on, because I do want to get through the next few before Rich jumps on to do his session as well.
Rich will be able to talk about that a bit more, actually. Yeah.
Oh, perfect. Well, there we go as well. We'll bring that into his Q&A
anyway.
session as well. This next to one of the questions is a subject I'm quite interested in myself, and actually we've got a speaker planned for future webinars that will cover this. So I'm going to go back to Chris for the first question. We'll cover this, the one I'm talking about now, in a while, because I think this could be quite broad. But Chris asks, have you found using a DSLR over a traditional larger broadcast camera has helped with access?
Hello, can you hear me?
Oh, I can. Yeah. Did we did sort of?
Don't know what happened there.
Yeah, me neither. Do you want to
froze? Yeah, I'm back.
Do you want to go for that question again?
Yep.
We've got to love Teams, haven't we? So have you found using a DSLR over a traditional larger broadcast camera has helped with access?
Yeah, a little bit. Yes, definitely a little bit. But to be honest, these now are being used a lot more, that now, even with this, you know, people will clock you as being a professional broadcast, potentially, you know, or photographer, whatever. So, you know, if you are in a situation where you really want to be, you know, sort of not, you know, incognito, protests in, you know, are a classic one where, you know, you don't really want to stand out as being a broadcast journalist. So often we'll shoot on the phone. We'll do stuff on the phone, and we've got apps on our BBC phones that allow us to then film and send immediately back to base any events that are happening. It's called PNG, and it's an internal BBC app that we have all installed on our phones, and that it's a really good bit of software, but really good app, and that we can use. So, and that, you know, and then you are just you know, you don't stand out. So, but, you know, having said that, I had a really funny, years ago, I was in Ingushetia on the border with Chechnya when it was all kicking off in Chechnya in sort of 2000, I think it was. And I was based in Moscow. We'd gone down there, and it was myself and Ola Girin, and we were in the back of a car. We had a driver and a bodyguard with, you know, he had a rifle with him, and we were sat in the back, and our fixer was also female. And we got in. I had my huge broadcast camera on my lap, and we come to a checkpoint, and the guards look in, and then they just glance in, and all they see are these three women in the back. So just immediately ignore us and start asking the driver and the bodyguard for their credentials and give them a full check. And it's like, right. And then just waved us through. And it's like, I said to all of them, God, we could end up going anywhere here. We could just literally, we could drive to Grozny at this rate, you know, not that we were going to, but far too dangerous. But, you know, you know, sometimes it's amazing how just, you know, it wasn't the big camera, just, they didn't clock it at all. So that's, you know, it's it's interesting moment. I still remember that very vividly.
I think Chris will be quite happy to hear that. I've just seen it. And again, if I'm assuming this is the Chris I think it is, I've seen a micro documentary that he's just filmed using that. It's really, really good as well. So I think he'll be quite pleased to hear what you just said there. I'll send you a link to it when we're offline so you can have a look if you want to. The next question I think is quite it's quite apt, especially considering what's going on in America at the moment. So I think this covers the wider industry, not just film and TV. But Joe asks, how do you feel about the increasing use of AI within the arts?
Yeah, I mean, you know, that is really going to have a big impact in the next few years. I mean, I'm already seeing, you know, software and apps that can edit packages and you know, audio can be edited. It is going to have a huge impact. My one piece of solace is that not, you know, AI can't go out and do this bit. It can be on it can be on well, I mean, they can create images, yes, of course. They can use remote cameras, CCTV, and all of that, and use it and UGC, user generated content, whatever, you know, people film on their phones and upload and all of that. But at the end of the day, I think it's going to impact a lot more on the journalistic and the editing side of things, initially at least, where, you know, it can be writing reports. It could edit a news package, a basic news package, nothing complicated. We already have software where if it's an interview, the edits will be done based on who's speaking, you know. So you put the footage in, and then you just literally press a button and sit back and you just watch it, edit it. I've watched these videos on YouTube and I'm just like, it's just crazy, you know. It's just the way it's going. And so that's, yeah, it's going to impact a lot of different areas, but those are the two I slightly fear are going to be the first impacted, but it's going to touch everybody, I would have thought. Oh, Rich is here.
Yeah, there we go. I'll just make sure he's oh wow, he sent the chat, so he should be in. So we'll eventually slowly but surely bring him in. I'll just give him some access so we can jump on, and then but yeah, no, I've kind of forgotten the question I was going to have, but it's regarding entry level. That's it, entry level. Do you think it's exclusively a degree entry level into this, or can you start like I did? I don't have a degree in this subject. I started marshalling and worked my way up that way. Do you think that's a viable route?
No, the apprenticeships that the BBC do are actually specifically aimed at school leavers. And you know, there are programs for people who have got degree, but the actual BBC apprenticeship scheme is aimed at people who don't have degrees, who are coming straight from school. And then they come straight into us at, you know, aged, you know, 18, and then it work through the system that way. So no, absolutely not. It's got much better on that respect. It's definitely not, you know, a proviso that you have to have gone to college for you know, certainly for my role, you know, because it's a very hands-on technical, you know, the technical role. So in a way, we're sort of we're now gearing towards more of getting apprentices in and people in younger, and then we train them up the way we want them, you know, we sort of mold them into what we want. So that's actually that's how we like to do it. So that's the way it's been going for a while now. So don't fear that you don't, oh, I don't have a degree. In fact, you're absolutely fine. You know, just look out for these apprenticeships schemes on the BBC Hub online.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, Julie. Rich, thank you for joining us. I see you come straight from literally your,
literally,
show.
yeah. I'm still wearing my makeup, still got my earpiece. Yeah, I've just dashed upstairs. So yeah, I'm joining you from Studio E at New Broadcasting House, which, as you can see, is the one that looks onto the back of the newsroom. So always a hive of activity behind me. That is a room which is, as Julie knows well, never quiet and never empty. But it's lovely to be here with all of you this evening.
I was worrying if you're going to get in. We have had some, I've been watching the email channels, and we have, by all accounts, had some issues with some of the Eventbrite links. So I was worried if you might or might not be able to get in. So we're going to take this opportunity to welcome the latecomers as well. And please don't worry, the entire webinar is being recorded and will be pushed out via our social media once we finish. So if you have missed anything, please don't worry. We'll be looking at Eventbrite for the next series, but there we go. But it does seem to be working, and we have got plenty of viewers in here tonight. So, Julie, that's been an amazing hour. Thank you very much. I hope you'll still hang around for the Q&A and interject with some of the chats we're going to have with Rich.
Yep. Want to hear?
and Corinne, have you got half an hour left in you?
Yep, still here.
Brilliant. Rich, we're going to kick off with your show reel. It's quite a long one, and I didn't have time to edit it down tonight, so we'll just run a few minutes. We'll share it with everyone, and then we'll cut back into where we are now.
Hello and welcome to our viewers on PBS in the United States and around the world. Now, the United States Supreme Court has a new justice. Ketanji Brown Jackson has been confirmed by the US Senate, and she'll become the first black woman to sit on the country's highest court and only the 6th woman in history to be a Supreme Court justice. Well, let's speak now to Danielle Conway, who's Dean and Professor of Law at Penn State Dickinson Law. Professor Conway, thank you very much for being with us. You're among students there, the district judges and attorneys general, and who knows, potentially even a Supreme Court justice of the future there. What's the conversation around this on campus? Well, we're joined now by the President of the Federated States of Micronesia, David Panuelo. He joins us now from Panapei. Mr. President, thank you very much for making the time for us. Delighted to have you on the programme. The United Nations says your country is one of those most directly at risk of climate change. What are you looking to get out of COP27?
Well, thank you, Rich, for having me on your programme.
Admiral Nicholas Crum, a journalist for the Chile Vision channel, was talking about the rise in robberies in the local area when it happened. His camera crew chased after the parrot, and luckily for them, it eventually dropped the earphone, so they managed to get it back. Never work with children or animals, that's what they say from all of us here in London. Thanks for your company. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Hello. The first question, which is the same that I asked Julie, which was just how did you land in this world? How did you get here?
Great question. The thing I always tell people is there is no right or wrong way into journalism and the media. It's not like engineering or medicine where you do X course and you get X job, then you get Y certificate and you get Y job. I always wanted to work in broadcasting. I was always in love with radio. I grew up in rural Aberdeenshire, so even a trip to a friend's house would be a 10-mile trip in the car, so the radio was always on. I loved radio from a young age. I did not think I would make it into journalism. I wasn't from London. I didn't have friends or family in the industry. My dad wasn't a correspondent, my mum wasn't a news editor, so it was always a bit of a pipe dream. I found out about hospital radio when I was 14, these, small voluntary radio stations that do exactly what it says in the tin, they serve a hospital. And so when I was 14, I started volunteering at the hospital radio station in Aberdeen, which was amazing fun because I got to play with the studio and I got to press the buttons and I got to make mistakes and I got to play and try things out and learn what worked and learn what didn't and walk around the wards talking to the patients who were there for 6 weeks because they had a complicated leg fracture or something, and they were the ones listening to the radio, so I got to hear from them about what they liked, what they didn't like, what records they wanted to hear, all this kind of stuff, which was such great grounding in what I did. So I decided that was kind of where I wanted to go. I then went off to university to do a degree in journalism and media at the University of Stirling. And other than it being a very good course, the other deciding factor for me was that it was free. I didn't come from a wealthy family, and being a Scottish student studying in Scotland, it didn't cost me a penny. That was kind of a vital thing. And I loved my course, and I did student radio at the same time. But as I mentioned, I didn't think the journalism was going to work out. I always knew it was a bit of a gamble. So at the same time, I kind of simultaneously pursued my backup option, which was to join the police. So I worked as a police officer in central Scotland whilst I was studying. And then when I graduated, I thought, okay, well, this is my shot. And I resigned from the police. And I said to myself, I can afford to give it a year to try and make my way into journalism. And if it doesn't work after a year, I know I've given it my best shot and I have to call it quits. And it turned out it worked. I lined up an internship at a company in Manchester. I had never been to Manchester in my life, so I upped sticks and moved to Manchester to do this unpaid 3-month internship for a company that made BBC documentaries. And I loved it, and I soaked it up, and I was working on radio programs for radios 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Live, World Service, and it was just absolutely terrific. I did not get offered a job at the end of it, so I had to shoot up back to Aberdeen, unemployed, feeling like I had no prospects. But this industry, you never know the way things are going to take you and who you're going to meet. So I always think it's best to just do your best and just try and meet as many people as you can, because you never know which way things are going to go. And one of the producers I'd worked with in Manchester introduced me to a producer in Aberdeen. And I started working for her just on a freelance basis as a researcher, 100 quid a day, helping her make her documentaries and her programs. And luck and chance play such a huge part of this industry. And I tell everyone this story. I got my first proper job at the BBC because I was doing an interview for this producer at the studios at BBC Aberdeen. And I went through to the kitchen to make a cup of tea at exactly the same time as the office manager, just by pure chance. I had met her before. She had offered me, she'd interviewed me for a job, which I didn't get, but she'd remembered me, and I'd kind of loosely kept in touch with her. And we started chit-chatting while we're making a cup of tea, as us Brits invariably do. And she said, oh, I've just had someone leave to take up a job in Glasgow. I need someone to do their job for 6 weeks. It will just be 6 weeks. That's all it will be. It will not be any more, just a fixed term 6-week contract. Are you available? Not, are you any good? Not, do you know anything about this subject area? Are you available? It's often the practical things that sometimes become most important. And I said, yes, I'm available. And that 6-week contract turned into 6 months, which has turned into 15 years. But the point of that story is that the luck and chance, if we hadn't met before, if she'd been on the phone, if my interview had overrun, like, you just never know the way these things are going to turn out. But kind of at the root of it was she knew who I was. I'd introduced her. I'd done some networking, and that can be really, really important. And then one of the great things about the BBC, as Julie may well have mentioned, is how big it is, how easy it is. Not easy, so that's the wrong word, how one can move around inside. So I worked in Aberdeen for a bit, Edinburgh, Glasgow. I reported technology stories. I produced arts programmes. And then I really kind of fell in love with international news. Still very much a producer. I actually didn't want to be on microphone or in front of the camera. I was happy being behind the scenes. And then I just had this moment where I realized, hold on, I set up that interview. I did that interview. I edited that audio. I wrote that script. Someone else is reading it. I can just do the reading part as well. And so I kind of started to move kind of in front of microphone. And then weirdly, again, the TV presenting also happened by chance. I was working as a TV reporter on attachment from radio because I wanted to learn some TV skills. And it was February 2020. This virus was starting to spread around the UK. COVID, it had now arrived in Britain. And it was about 20 to midnight in Broadcasting House in that newsroom behind me. And the presenter that night called in sick. He said, I think I've got this coronavirus thing. I can't come into the building. I can't risk it. And the editor comes up to me. And again, remember what I said about the practicalities are often the most important thing. The editor comes up to me and says, Rich, it's 20 to midnight. You present on the radio all the time. You are literally the only person in the building in a suit. Can you do the TV tonight? I had never sat in a TV studio before. I had never read autocue before. I had about an hour to prepare. It was one of those sink or swim moments. I think you kind of have to throw yourselves into these. And so I said, yes. You know, if I say no, she'll never ask me again. So I said, yes. And then after that, I said, thanks very much. Won't ask you again. A few weeks later, a freelancer slept in. So they asked me again. And they said, oh, you know, we don't mind you. We don't hate you. So you keep doing it, you know, and it kind of went from there. And I love it. You know, still to this day, 15 years down the line, I get such a buzz coming into work. I absolutely love what I do. I love the people I work with. I love what we get to do. It's such a huge privilege to do this job. But that's been my journey so far.
Amazing. And what's the main sort of differences or similarities between radio and TV? Obviously, you're still doing the presenting, you're still doing that etiquette of being able to speak and adapt to whatever situation you're talking about. But sort of just the day-to-day, how does that differ between TV and radio?
Yeah, great question. So the two are different. TV is a lot slower. TV depends on pictures, obviously. And that can sometimes mean you move at a slower pace. Sometimes you need to wait for a crew to get into the situation, into the scene where something is happening. You know, Julie and her colleagues, you know, can't teleport themselves. They need to fly in, get on the ground, or you need to, you know, wait for the Prime Minister to stand up and give a speech in front of the cameras. So that can sometimes be frustrating. The benefit of pictures is they can help transport someone somewhere. You know, if you're talking about a locust plague in East Africa, I want to see those millions of bugs flying around. That's harder to do on radio sometimes. The benefit of radio is that it's quicker. It also can be more intimate. You know, you form a personal connection with people when you're talking to them as a radio listener. I also sometimes think that journalism can be better because, and Julie may disagree with me on this, but cameras can sometimes, I find, get in the way of an interview. So, for example, the first documentary I made for the BBC myself was about young male suicide in Scotland and the high rates of suicide and self-harm and violence amongst young men in Scotland. And as part of the programme, I went into Parliament Young Offenders Institute in central Scotland, and I was invited to sit down in a room with these 10 young men, all of whom had been sentenced for violent offences and had history of mental health difficulties, self-harm, attempting suicide, been members of gangs and such like. And they were in the room along with people from rival gangs, rival groups, rival areas. And I wanted them to tell me about themselves and their mental health struggles and their histories. And I think if that had a camera in the room, that would have been difficult. But instead, it was just me and a microphone. And I said to them, listen, I'm going to tell you, ask you some questions about your own stories. It's only fair I tell you about myself. This is me. This is why I'm doing this story. This is why I think it's important. Now tell me about you. What happened to you? And you just put the microphone under them and you just listen. And people, even these young guys, normally closed books when it comes to talking about their mental health, their backgrounds, the abuse they suffered as children, they just opened up. And radio can really do that beautifully sometimes.
Yeah, that's really interesting how quite often people see a camera and freeze, or they sort of go completely the opposite end and act goofy, like you see when you do news reporting on the street and there's a camera there and someone's reporting and they're talking about all the shops closing or whatever is happening in that area, and you see people running to and fro behind, or it's completely opposite where they just sort of, no, don't look at me, don't I don't want to be here.
Well, also a camera can sometimes feel like it's staring at you. And actually what I would say is Julie and my colleagues in the camera teams have one of the really important parts of their job is the interpersonal skills they have before they put the camera on someone. You know, it's so important to get people to relax, you know, and to make them feel comfortable and like they're not being stared at and scrutinized. But it's a very difficult skill, that.
And what would you say for someone who wants to get into presenting, whether that's for radio or TV, what would you say are the main skill sets that they would need as a human, not just as a professional?
Yeah, I'm glad you said human. That's really important because we're people and we are trying to connect with other people. Now, when I'm on air around the world, I'm talking to people in Dorset and Dakar and New York and Sydney, Australia, but we're all still just people and you need to form that human connection. And what happens often when I talk to young students especially is they'll chat to me on Zoom, get some career advice, they'll be perfectly normal and human, and then they send me a show reel and it's them on camera talking like this, and suddenly they're trying to be a reporter, and I say to them, don't, just be yourself. Like, you really have to be yourself. And it's really important that that kind of warmth and empathy can come across, you know, and if you're doing lighter stories, you can laugh. If you're doing sad stories, you can kind of hold that moment. So I think the most important thing is to find out what works for you. And I've been at the BBC 15 years now and only doing TV for the last kind of 3 of those. But remember what I said at the beginning, from 14, I was playing around in a hospital radio studio. You know, I was recording myself, my programs, listening back, kind of finding my style, because there are 1,000,001 cardboard cutout reporters out there. So I think the most important thing is to find out what your style is. And with that comes your interests as well. And the two kind of go hand in glove, because you might be really interested in the arts and you really want to get into reporting art stories, or like me, you might be interested in international affairs or domestic stories or science and tech. And so when you find out what makes you click, what gives you that buzz, that helps find out who you are, which helps kind of form who you are on air. But you've got to play around, you've got to try things out. So, you know, contact community radio stations, community TV stations, your local newspaper, your local hospital radio station, because getting that experience in front of a mic, in front of a camera, recording yourself, watching yourself back, it feels weird at first. You know, no one likes hearing themselves recorded. Oh, I don't sound like that. Yes, you do. Get over it. You know, and playing around with your style is really important.
And would you say it's quite departmentalised within the BBC of having people who just do sports and just do, because I obviously you see watching the news, it's generally the same people who are doing the 6 o'clock, the 10 o'clock. But with the other side of reporting, is it segmented like that, or is it, you know,
yeah, so specialist knowledge is very important, you know, and if you study the history of Russia and you speak Russian fluently, then that will give you a certain weight as a Moscow correspondent. Or if you follow sports avidly and are not really interested in world affairs, then obviously you're kind of leaning towards sport more. So specialisms are great and they're really, really important. You know, having a technology correspondent who can go on air and in 45 seconds explain what the hell is Bitcoin and what does this quote Bitcoin crash mean for regular people, do that in 45 seconds in a way that makes sense to someone who isn't a tech expert is really, really important. But also being a generalist is fine. You know, there's the saying, a jack of all trades is a master of none. It's actually often misquoted because the actual expression in full is a jack of all trades is a master of none, but still always better than a master of one. Fun fact for you there. So I think being across a kind of wide brief is quite good. Now, I love international news and I have certain strengths when it comes to particular areas or particular topics. I'm, you know, less well good on the politics of Cornwall, for example, but it's, you know, it's okay to have these highs and lows and to kind of throw yourself into it, because as well as a presenter, it's not about me. I'm not there to show off how much I know about Niger or how much I know about Northern Irish politics. I'm there to represent the audience. So when I get the specialist correspondent on, it's my job to say, well, you know, you tell us about this politics in Belfast at the moment. What does it actually mean? You know, it's my job to ask those questions on behalf of the audience.
Interesting. And the journey from someone who has no experience and they've sent in a show reel and they've got maybe an apprenticeship, how would they get those first moments in front of the camera? Obviously, we know your story of just having those moments and those opportunities pop up. But generally, is there a pathway? Do you start off as the tea girl in the back and, you know, do you start off handing around the sandwiches, or, you know, where's that path?
So again, with the caveat that there's no right or wrong, you have to ask. You have to ask people things. And actually, you know, so many people got into this industry because someone once gave them a chance, whether that was, okay, you're eating into my lunch break, but let's have a chat. I've got 10 minutes. Or, yeah, sure, I've got some downtime. Let's do this. You know, people do each other favors. And that's so, so important. I mean, for example, this studio I'm in is not supposed to be occupied just now, but I said to one of the directors, oh, can you do me a favor? I've got this tour. Oh yeah, Rich, no problem. I'll switch the lights on. I'll put the screens on for you. You know, it's those little things. You know, when I started out in presenting, you know, I only had a few hours under my belt, you know, finding a director saying, oh, no, this is your lunch break. I'm really sorry. Could you, go into a gallery and open up the studio for me so I can practice doing this or that or the other? So asking people, being upfront is really, really important. Don't shy away, be open with your ambitions. Listen, I really want to try that. I really want to get into that. Could you show me how you did this? That's really important. That sometimes means coming in on days off. It sometimes means staying late, doing things in your own time. But that's where you meet people, you network with people, you get a buzz. And sometimes it does mean making a cup of tea for someone. I mean, when I'm done with this call, I'll find a director, say, listen, can I buy you a sandwich? Can I make you a coffee? Whatever. And just, again, being around people is a great way to get known, and people then want to help you out and do you a favor as well.
Interesting. I just saw there the little pop that said down that we'd only got 5 minutes left. So I just want to open up and see if there's any questions. Andy, has anything popped up?
It's basically, we're along the same lines, which is how do we get into the industry? So Rich, you're really answering those questions as we go along there as well. I use clock the 5 minutes as well, and because this is our first one, I'm very wary about us suddenly getting cut off. So just in case we do get cut off bang on half past, I just wanted to thank everyone that came along to view this. Apologies to anyone that experienced any troubles with the Eventbrite link. We'll be looking at ticket providers for the next one, and we will be along again at a to be confirmed date for another webinar, which will be covering locations, unit management, location scouting, etc. So that's my little bit. For the time being, guys, just carry on answering the questions until we either get cut off or we get to half past.
Are there any in the chat, Andy? I can't quite see.
Nothing's come up at the moment, nothing new.
Right.
But oh, there you go. No, there's thanks. Yeah, we've got a thank you for this. It's been really incredibly useful. But the main theme that I'm seeing really at the moment, Rich, is that big one. How do we get to the industry? There was a question asked earlier on during Julie's session regarding CVs. You may be able to touch a little bit on that, do you think? Or
yeah, sure. So I do a lot of recruitment in my team, so I see a lot of CVs. My main advice is keep it brief. Keep it to one page if you can. It's horrible to say it because you're talking about someone's life and work and their dreams, but there often just isn't the time to scan over a CV and look in detail. It's fine for certain grammar rules to go out the window with a CV, in your bio at the top. Think of it like a tweet that you might post. Get it short and snappy. Get to the point. Make it different. I want to hear about you. I don't want to see this cardboard cutout. I want to see what makes you tick. And that really can be anything. You might be a massive fan of Steven Spielberg and have seen every single film Steven Spielberg has ever made in his entire life, right the way back to when he was 18 years old. Put that in there. That tells me something about you. You might be willing to travel, and you've traveled all over South Asia and know the geography of India like the back of your hand. You might have 20 gun dogs in your back garden, which you take gun dog training every weekend. Like, that tells me about you. And it's really noteworthy that in media and journalism in particular, you never know when something is going to become an expertise. That Steven Spielberg example I gave you, for example, on the day when Mr. Spielberg passes away, you are the journalist I want to be talking to get on air to hear about Mr. Spielberg. So don't ever think, oh, that's irrelevant, or that's useless, because if nothing else, it makes you different and it makes you stand out. The other thing I'll say about CVs is there have been some really interesting studies done on how people read CVs. The average time someone takes looking at a CV is, I think, 7 seconds, and they tend to scan them. There's screen reading technology which shows people tend to scan them in an F shape. Use that science to your advantage. Don't bury something crucial and important in an area that the science tells you people tend not to look at. Put it in the top, put it down the left-hand side. Think about visually, you don't have to be a graphic designer, just clean and simple. I don't want it cluttered with pictures or graphics or too much color. The other thing I'd say is most people now do not print out CVs. So if you're including links to your social media, make it a link. Make it easy for me. If I get your CV and it's got your LinkedIn profile on there, make it a link. I'll click on it. Tied in with your CVs, think about your social media. You don't have to be on social media, and you certainly don't have to be on every platform or posting every day. But think about what it tells about you. When I get people applying for jobs on my team, guess what I do? I Google them. I want to know who's coming to me looking for a job. And, like I said, it's fine if they don't have 100,000 followers. But what they do post tells me about them. Oh, they're tweeting every day about the politics of the White House, or, you know, what's happening in Russia at the moment. They clearly are interested in Russia, and there's a lot happening in Russia. I want this person on my team. So all that kind of bundles together, I think.
And where would you find those people? Is that through the BBC Hub? Like, how would people find you to send them the CVs? Is it through job postings or?
Yeah, through job postings. Yeah, so to register for the BBC Careers website, you know, do the same for all the other organizations, whether it's CNN, Channel 4, Al Jazeera, you know, or whoever you think you might want to work for. But also unsolicited contact is fine, I think. It shows initiative. If there's a particular type of journalism you like, if there are programs you love, contact the editors. You know, if you've seen an amazing panorama or Newsnight with Mark Urban on the front lines in Ukraine, email him, say, Mark, that was an absolutely astounding program, great piece of journalism. I love what you do. I would love to do what you do. I know you're busy, but can I have 10 minutes for a chat? You know, you often won't get replies. Journalists are busy people, but it only takes that one. And you've got a contact, you've got a potential foot in the door. And, you know, it might not result in something immediate, but you never know how these things are going to pan out. You never know when you might have that 10-minute chat with Mark Urban. It's lovely, finishes, doesn't go anywhere. And then a year later, you're on an apprenticeship and you bump into Mark Urban, or he's looking for a new producer. Like, you just never know. So keep CVs pithy, think about social media, but proactively contact people that you would like to work with or whose work you admire.
That's great. Thank you very much there, Rich. I know that's something that comes up a lot, and certainly came up a lot on our course, trying to differentiate between a corporate CV and an entertainment industry CV. We haven't been kicked off yet, so we've got time for a question that's popped up, and let's see how this goes. But basically, Elliot asked, and apologies for earlier, Elliot, I mispronounced your name. I used your surname by the looks of things. Elliot asked, how do you manage your work-life balance as a journalist?
It's tough. Journalism can be demanding. The shifts can be long. Breaking news can kibosh dinner plans. I spent 2 years as a Europe reporter during what I thought would be a busy period, but it was the period when we had Charlie Hebdo, the Bataclan, the migrant crisis, the Indie Ref. You're constantly on planes, trains, automobiles, etc. So it can be tough. Your family and friends have to be understanding, and I'm lucky they always are. But it is also important for you to then know when to switch off. So when I go on holiday for more than a long weekend, Twitter gets deleted off my phone. I don't look at the news. I don't look at my emails. And that's important. That is a really big one. Also, kind of recognizing in yourself when you're kind of reaching that point of having had too much work-wise is important. You know, journalism is great fun, but it's not always pleasant. You know, there are people in that newsroom, for example, who, when ISIS were beheading people back in 2015, you see it on the TV and the image stops and it's blurred out and it's quote unquote safe. People in that newsroom had to see the raw stuff to know where to cut it, to know where to blur it. That's not an easy thing to do. I don't need to explain to people in the forces about, you know, living with trauma and what that's like and what that can do to you. So there's an important kind of personal learning curve there for trying to recognize those signs in yourself. Again, I'm very lucky. I have great family, but, you know, sometimes coming home from a difficult night shift or a long late shift, all I want to do is have a shower and take my dog for a walk and not talk to anyone, you know, so that kind of stuff can be really important.
Where would you? You go, Andy.
No, you go for it. Yeah.
I was going to say, where would you say that you feel most at home within your journalism from the start of your career, where you're still working out exactly where you wanted to be, to now? Where have you found that sort of happy place?
Yeah, so I've always loved technology stories just because it's a bit of a personal interest of mine. So it's always felt easy is the wrong word, but just comfortable, you know, talking about gadgets and gizmos and AI and iPhones and all this kind of stuff. International news is where I absolutely feel comfortable. You know, lots of people say, you know, why, you know, I live in the middle of Doncaster. Why do I need to know what's happening in Myanmar or the middle of New Zealand? My take is that international news has an effect on all of us. Back in 2020, early 2020, I had to pitch hard to do a story that I really wanted to do, and I was eventually allowed to do this story. It got 90 seconds on air at 5:30 in the morning, and that story was the death in central China of a man with a mysterious new disease. Now, man dies in central China is not normally a big earth-shattering world news story, but I'm going to tell you that story turned out to affect us all. So, you know, I'm a firm believer that we can make connections with each other around the world through journalism, and that these stories do have an effect on all of us. And that's where I've come to feel really comfortable in trying to piece the world together for people who might not be traveling to China, or who might not know the intricacy of the auto worker strike that's going on in Detroit. What does that mean for us Brits buying cars, you know, in London or Manchester or Edinburgh? You know, so I like trying to join those dots. That's where I feel comfortable.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I wasn't aware of the fact that you could, as a presenter, you could choose, like, if you found a story that you think, actually, no, I want to follow this, I want to do a piece about this. I wasn't aware that you, personal choice, could choose, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so it's not quite like that. The newsroom, fortunately, is very egalitarian. Everyone's opinion matters because everyone's got a different background and a different life story. And sometimes people put their hand up and say, guys, have you seen what's happening in Sudan? It's really, really important. I think we should cover it. And that person might be the junior researcher who's only been on the team for a week, you know, and it's important that we listen to everyone's voices. So the editorial meetings are always a great chance to thrash out these ideas. And with that China story, I was a reporter at the time. I hadn't started presenting yet. And I had followed SARS closely when that hit Southeast Asia a few years previously. And so I was pitching this saying, listen, SARS killed 800 people. I know only one man has died, but what if it goes on to kill 800 people? So that was my kind of pitch. And if you remember, at the time, Donald Trump was president. He was tweeting every day, changing foreign policy, changing American domestic policy. So really, man dies in China was not a big story. The big story was, what has President Trump been saying? But sometimes someone can, you know, pitch for an idea and an editor is open to it.
And what's next for you? Is this the career that you want to stick on, or is there a wiggle room for you to go somewhere else?
I really, like I said before, I really love what I do. It's an incredible privilege, an incredible responsibility, but it's my job to talk to people. Like, it's my job to connect with people around the world, ask them questions. You know, not everyone gets to talk to the foreign minister of Azerbaijan or the mayor of Chicago. I get to do that, and I get to call it work. So I love what I'm doing at the moment. I recently did take a bit of time out to go back to uni to do a master's, not because I felt it was necessary, but because news, you deal with things really, really quickly. And I wanted to change my brain gear and think about something for a while. So I started working part-time instead of full-time, and I studied in the rest of the time to do a master's in international security, which was great fun. But ultimately, I still love what I'm doing. I love talking to audiences. I love talking to people around the world. We'll see how long that goes on for. I don't have any immediate plans to go elsewhere. Maybe when I get the grades for my master's, that might change my mind. I don't know. But for the time being, I'm definitely happy where I am.
And is the BBC your home, or would you move to other news presenting channels?
I'm not closed to other presenting channels. There are lots of news organisations I respect around the world, but I really love the BBC. It is where I always wanted to work, and because of its global spread, that means a huge amount to me. I remember distinctly this wow moment I had when I first started at the BBC in 2008, and I was doing some shifts at the World Service in central London, and it was during the Kenyan election riots, and this was a time when people were being killed on the streets because of their politics. And we were covering this on the World Service. And my job as a lowly researcher was answering the phones and getting people on air. And I answered the phone to this guy who was cowering under his desk in his office in Nairobi with the door locked behind him as guys with machetes ransacked their office. And in that moment, he didn't want to call his mum. He didn't want to call his boss. He didn't want to call his partner. He wanted to call the BBC. And he phoned me and said, please tell the world what is happening. And it still gives me goosebumps to think about it, because it is so incredibly important what we do. And hand on heart, I've never been anywhere in the world in all my travels where I've got in the back of a taxi or talked to someone in a hotel or whatever, and they've not known what the BBC is. They've not heard of the BBC. That is incredibly powerful and incredibly important. So I feel very much at home here.
Yeah, that's lovely to hear. And we were saying, I asked Julie earlier about, is there any regrets or is anything that she wished had been different? And she was like, no, I've loved it. Like everything that she's been through and seen, it's built her into the career and to the woman that she is now. So it's nice to hear that you've also had a similar experience in the same umbrella.
Yeah, I think regrets is a tough one, because you can always think, oh, I wish I'd done that story differently, or I wish I'd asked that question or whatever. But what's done is done. And you can only build on that, really.
I just want to thank you all for helping out with this tonight. It's been an amazing evening. I've enjoyed listening to both of you, both Julie and Rich, and Corinne. Thank you so much for stepping in to help deliver this. As always, you're there to back me up when I have these projects and want to carry them forward. So I'll see you at the next one. I want to thank everyone else that attended as well. We're going to wrap it up here to let these good people that have been viewing us step away for a bit. Like I mentioned, this will be recorded. It'll be stuck up on our social media, and we'll be back in either a month or two's time with locations, unit management, location scouting, etc. But yeah, no, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Pleasure to do it.
Brilliant. I'm going to run our exit sort of credits, and if anyone wants to sort of hang around and chat afterwards, feel free. But I'm going to drop my camera and mic and run the credits for now. But yeah, thank you very much.
See you.
Bye.